Good evening, everyone. My name is Ziad Ramadan. I'm the Executive Director of the West Harlem Development Corporation. And I wanted to thank you all for being here with us this evening and welcome you to the first HDFC Forum. WHDC, yeah, that's not me, but I welcome you on behalf of our chair, the Honorable Judge Milton Tingling, former Supreme Court Justice and current County Clerk of the City of New York. And we're very lucky to have him as our chair and a very distinguished board who create policy for WHDC for us, the staff, to execute. WHDC is engaged in a variety of different tasks and work to help the West Harlem community specifically, things such as a grant program. We have a $2 million grant program for not-for-profits from West Harlem or who serve West Harlem currently. We have summer youth programs called Arise, and we're partnering with Boys and Girls Club of Harlem to provide summer camp for over 150 kids from our community, predominantly teens, to make sure that we don't have that summer slide, to give them opportunities for enrichment during the summer. We have excellent adult programs that go on throughout the years, from seeing Broadway plays to going to parks and wonderful cultural events. And what we did this year is we kicked off an HDFC resource center. And we are heading it up by none other than our dear friend and former board member, Vincent Morgan. And before I hand off the program to him, who will carry you through the program and moderate it, I just wanted to thank the staff of West Harlem Development Corporation, from Joanna Castro, Franklin Nibbs, Eve Rose Charles, and actually Violet and Julian Morgan, Vince's kids, who are here downstairs registering people in. I want to thank this really, this is an all-star cast for HDFC information on just a variety of things that are vital to the HDFC world. And last but not least, I want to hand it off to your moderator for the evening, Vincent Morgan. Thank you all for being here.
Good evening, everybody. So first of all, thank you for coming out. We're, in this post-COVID time, the challenge with sort of getting information out was weird. So we were like, should we do an event? And we had the opportunity to do something at Columbia in this beautiful facility. And we thought it was a great idea because everyone that lives in this community knows the sort of the back and forth and the challenges, community sort of outcry in many instances about these buildings being built and how they were built. But they're here, and to their credit, they built this beautiful facility. And I've been to a few community events here, so it's nice to have the opportunity to utilize this space. It's also nice for people to be able to come here and see it, because we walk past it or we go past it and we haven't necessarily seen the inside of it. So thank all of you for venturing out. The other thing is that after COVID, it's kind of weird doing live events. Everybody's so socialized now to do live streaming or Zoom events that we were like, should we do a live event? Let's see if people will come out and do it. But I think that you have to do events so that people start getting used to it again. With the HDFC community, we have a lot of seniors. So there are physical challenges sometimes to coming out, but it's a nice summer night. So, I'm glad that you all came and joined us in person. The event is being live streamed. There was a little mix-up with the live stream location, but it is available on our website, so people should be able to Google it and find it either via YouTube or via the West Harlem Development Corporation site, which is westharlemdc.org/HDFC. The link is live there. If anyone gets a text like, I'm trying to find the live stream while this is going on, you can respond to them. Just go to our website and it's there. So thank you. You can text, but please silence your phone. We are live streaming this. Just make sure you take a moment to silence the phone. Now, on to this. Good evening. My name is Vincent Morgan, and I am the director of the newly formed HDFC Resource Center at the West Harlem Development Corporation. Housing Development Fund cooperatives in New York City are at a major crossroads. I think we all know that. Buildings are dealing with a wide range of issues that are eroding their quality of life and overall property values, issues ranging from deteriorating infrastructure, steadily rising operating costs, as we all know, prices keep going up, to ever more stringent energy conservation measures. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pike, and one of the ways we wanted to kick this off is basically creating these forums so that we can educate people so they can get ready for what's coming down the road in the future. These are just a few examples of the challenges faced by HDFC boards and shareholders. In addition, in a few short years, 2029, which is not very far away, the legislation that created HDFCs in the 1980s expires, ending protections and potentially the exemptions that allowed them to remain affordable in the first place. Unless urgent government action is taken, the HDFC community is going to remain in limbo for the time period. The HDF Resource Center was envisioned within the Community Benefits Agreement created as a part of the Columbia University West Side campus expansion. The CBA specifically cites an HDFC Resource Center, which is to provide funding to support and preserve the HDFC community. The center will provide education, advocacy, information, and technical assistance to Community District 9 HDFC cooperatives. The initial work of the Resource Center, which I have been managing, has primarily focused on developing a plan of action to facilitate contact with stakeholders within the community, as well as potential allies within this important housing sector. It is imperative at this point, with all these existential threats coming from all over for the HDFC community, that we work together to protect this vital part of New York's affordable housing stock and safeguard the future for HDFCs. I think we can all be in agreement on that. This is the first of what we hope to be a continued dialogue with you about issues that impact you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. I'm very proud of this panel too. This is like probably the first time that I've got, this is like an all-star HDFC group right here. They're not seated in a particular order, but I'm just going to go through the list here. Emanuela Lupa, who is a partner with Smith, Buss, and Jacobs, LLP. She is also the attorney for the HDFC Coalition. Heather Steele, our other attorney, who is a senior counsel with the Lasser Law Group. Margie Brown, which we should give a welcome to. She is the new executive director of UHAB. Avi Geller, who has become one of my favorite people in the world. You always have to know, I'm a former banker, you always have to know the finance guy. Avi Geller is the vice president of Meridian Capital, and we're gonna really focus a lot of the conversation, or at the end of the conversation, on the finance guys, so please wait for the whole conversation because we're gonna hit the finance guys at the end with some questions about what we need to do. Rosie Tavares, who is the senior sustainability consultant for the NYC Accelerator. Paula Alexandra Soto, I just like saying that, I'm gonna say it again, Paula Alexandra Soto, who is a HDFC shareholder. And the great thing about Paula grew up in an HDFC, and then she grew up to buy a unit in her HDFC and has served on the board. So I really felt it was important on this panel of experts to have somebody who is a HDFC lifer and who is there and has served, you know, in her community. So she's probably got the most experience out of everybody. I am going to say this, you know, like the flip tax issue and the insurance issue from last year was such a hot note, and there was so many emails that I got and questions about it. Michael Schwartz, who is the president of Sims Insurance Agency, is going to help us understand what's going on with insurance, because that's something that every one of our buildings is dealing with. And last but not least, Marco Tolesano, who is the director of sales for Carlton Energy Consulting. And he is going to explain to us some of the regulations around Local Law 97, 84, 11, 16, 27. These regulations and these environmental conservation things come so fast and furious, I get the numbers confused. So hopefully you can help us get through that. So that's it. So let's start the panel. Welcome. Thank you. So the first section I want to talk about, and this may sound remedial for some, and for others, I think that we just need to revisit sort of these basic points. But I want to go to a question, just a general question about your feelings about the current state of HDFCs. Where are HDFCs at, and some of the challenges that are coming down the pike for HDFCs? So if I could start with, let's start with Ms. Lupu.
Thank you.
Let's talk about some of the challenges.
Is this working? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So aside from the challenges that HDFCs have faced and continue to face, there are very new things coming down the pike. The most challenging element is this 2029 that's coming near. And specifically, most HDFCs, not all, but the overwhelming portion of them receive something called a damp exemption, which is essentially a massive reduction in the real estate taxes that you pay. As shareholders, a portion of your maintenance is used for real estate taxes. Today, it's a very small portion. That exemption will expire in 2029. What that means different things for different buildings, but what it means for everyone is maintenance increases for all of their shareholders. And it is imperative that the HDFC community bind together, and this is not limited to West Harlem. It carries through Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, everywhere where there are HDFCs. There's over 1,200 buildings throughout the city that are being affected by this, and it is imperative that the city council and the state legislatures get behind an extension of the tax credits that HDFCs receive. Losing these tax credits will defeat the very nature of affordability that is at the essence of HDFCs and the entire community. To add to that are a lot of the topics that you're going to hear about tonight with your various local laws that involve lots of numbers. There are a lot of numbers in the end. In the end, all of those numbers equal dollars. And that's the problem. That aside from the fact that you are facing a possibility of major tax increases 6 years away. It's not so far. You also have a ton of city regulations that you need to comply with, which will cost. So planning is what needs to be happening. And I recognize board members in the audience. I hope all of you are reaching out to your attorneys, your managers, to each other, to the West Harlem Development Association, to each other for support in figuring out how to plan for the future. Because living in today is not enough. So I think the biggest challenge, if I were to sum that all up, is in planning. Because nothing is insurmountable if you face it and plan for it.
Margie, can you follow up with that? I know you actually, how do I say this? You has a long history with HDFCs, and you're coming into it new. So your perspective is interesting because you worked in housing for a long time, but you're actually putting on a new hat. So what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yes, it's been really great to be at UHAB and coming in at such an interesting moment. The world really has been in crisis for a number of years with the COVID pandemic, and HDFCs really have been affected by that, feeling the stresses of a lot of the broader housing market, rising costs, particularly because HDFCs are affordable housing. A lot of people have seen reduced incomes. In some cases, we've seen deferred maintenance of buildings. So just the broader stresses that are seen across the world really are felt in HDFCs. That said, HDFCs and cooperative housing across the nation and even globally have time and again showed to be some of the more resilient type of housing and just a resource for the communities that live in them through crisis. In so many HDFCs, we saw the community coming together to create, shared childcare during COVID, to do mask distribution, to help their neighbors with food insecurity. Also, in terms of weathering economic crises, HDFCs and cooperative homes tend to help mitigate some of the risk for homeowners. We see lesser rates of foreclosure and displacement among cooperative shareholders than we do in single-family homes and even among renters. And that is really the value of community and cooperation. So while we have all been through this major period of stress, we really think that the HDFC community is on better footing than a lot of our neighbors, which is really exciting to see. This is also a time when we're seeing really renewed interest, and in some cases, just new sources of interest in community ownership, in cooperation. And I think that's really a reflection of being able to see how cooperators have weathered this storm. And so it's a really exciting time, and I think that we are well poised to get greater support and more traction and more cooperatives, more affordable homeownership options in New York City.
Thank you. I'm gonna add this little kink into this question, and I want to direct it to Paula, Ms. Soto, because you have the perspective of being not only a lifelong resident, but a shareholder and a board member. You know, sort of what are the challenges of it? But more importantly, I think a lot of people in this room are dealing with this. Columbia builds these buildings. The building that you, or the apartment building that you lived in, the cooperative that you lived in since the 90s, you know, when nobody wanted to live in the area and you've invested all of this money in the building, you've spent the time there, then it becomes a very popular neighborhood. And the balance of how you maintain sort of the integrity of the HDFC in this exploding housing market with diminishing affordable housing opportunity, which causes a ripple effect. You know, how does that challenge impact you and your day-to-day sort of, you know, life in your building?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think for me personally, I know that I actually graduated from Columbia University during the pandemic as a graduate student in their School of the Arts. So I really personally felt the broader issue of Columbia University and how it has helped the community in terms of the value of the properties, right? The issues that arose of them and how they tried or how they were able to build all of these buildings. But also as an HDFC, knowing that if it wasn't for that program, I wouldn't have been able to stay in this neighborhood. And I wouldn't have been able to go to grad school, to be honest, because like if you're paying market value rent in New York City, the last thing you're thinking about is, oh, you know, what program should I enroll in that's going to cost me 3 figures by the time I'm done, right? So for me, HDFCs have been an essential part of my mother's American dream, right? Because she came here so that I could have a better future. And I know that without this program and these kinds of programming, that would not have been possible. I know that for sure. It's the reason that I have made the sacrifices that I made to be part of the board to ensure that our building continue to succeed and flourish in this environment. HDFCs was also the reason that during the pandemic we didn't raise the rent for the commercial spaces. We didn't raise maintenance. We tried as much as possible to work with tenants that could not afford to pay their maintenance, or if there are any issues of that kind of came up during that time. We really did work as a community because our HDFCs, unlike others, the board of directors manages the building. So everyone that's in charge of making sure that everything's going well is in the building themselves. So I really do, for me, feel that it's just an essential part of one, making New York City affordable for everyone and not just the ones that make the most amount of money, but also ensuring that us as a community are able to better our homes and better our own lives, so that it's not really about like, the same struggles that our parents went through are going to be the same exact struggles that we're going to experience in terms of housing, but that our parents are actually, and that we are able to build a better foundation for the next generation of people that are going to need affordable housing. Because unfortunately, this is like someone mentioned earlier, like an HDFC is like a democracy, and much like our nation, we're struggling. And we're having problems, but it really does take the community and the cooperation of all in order for us to get through these problems together.
Thank you. I'm going to direct this to Heather to start out. Explain this to me. Explain to me the conversation now, sometimes tenuous conversation now about buildings and people who've owned these buildings for decades, and now we're coming to the end of the exemptions and all of this, and HPD's relationship managing the program, and how all of that works, and then some of the instances where the HPD comes in and they says, we'll loan you money, but you've got to sign this new regulatory agreement. Explain that to me, because I hear so many different sides of it, and I just don't know. And what's the issue?
And thank you for the question. It's a broad one. I think there are a lot of issues in there, and I hope that I can offer some explanation, and then maybe some others can pitch in.
Right.
So just from a general legal perspective, I think the first big issue is that HDFCs are all so different. The landscape of HDFCs is so different. There's sort of a patchwork of overlapping laws and regulations. Of course, they're all established under the private housing finance law, and then you have the business corporations law, which governs all of the certificates of incorporation. Then you have the HPD regulations on top of that. And then depending on when the HDFCs were actually started, what era, they're just subject to different regulations, to different types of policies, and different types of restrictions that are in their particular governing documents. So it's really important as shareholders and as parts of the HDFC community that boards and residents understand what's in their governing documents and makes sure that they're up to date, makes sure that they're compliant, and also just makes sure that the co-op is operating in compliance with them in terms of things like holding elections, to make sure that you have a board that's properly, that's duly elected and empowered to actually make decisions. What's happening now with a lot of the regulations coming down the pike is that since they're going to be impacting the vast majority of HDFCs, everyone is going to have to be up to date on what your policies are, what regulations impact your HDFC, and how to best deal with them. So it's going to be really important to make sure that you have functioning boards in place, and to make sure that you do whatever needs to be done to improve your operating efficiency in order to be able to just deal, financially, policy-wise, decision-wise with the laws and regulations that are to come. Right. Is there more that I missed there?
That was an excellent start. Emmanuel, but and that's great. That explains it. There's 200 and some buildings in West Harlem, and every one of them is completely different. They have a different social makeup. They have a different age. They have different, maintenance issues. They have different, camaraderie in the building. It becomes all of these different things. But, the conversation about private ownership of these buildings, and then the oversight for HPD, which in many instances is already worn off because they're not, under the regulatory agreement for a lot of buildings. Then it becomes a conversation. Then it was like, well, we're not under regulatory. Why should we go back? The conversation about private ownership of these and self-determination becomes this issue for a lot of buildings. And, folding that back into Emanuela, I'm directing the question to you, is why does that rope in back to like your governance documents and your oversight when you have that conversation? Why is that? Where is that their connection there?
So there's this perception that HPD somehow governs. The reality is not consistent with the perception, because the reality is that the division in HPD that's responsible for the supervision, and I use the quotation marks, of HDFCs is grossly understaffed, underfunded, and has always been. And Mark Matthews, who was the head, essentially, even though not in title, but in reality, of that division forever, recently retired. And it's been a relative revolving door since then. The real supervision has to happen in the building. It is your responsibility as shareholders to hold each other accountable for the rules. Relying on outside entities to come in and force your fellow shareholders to follow the rules is not realistic. I get calls from shareholders and shareholder groups and HDFCs every week. My board, they're doing this, they're doing that, what do I do? I can't afford an attorney. We don't have the resources to pay for it. We've contacted HPD, they're not assisting us. UHAB is trying to push them to do something, but they have limited powers because they can insist, they can request, they can demand, but they can't force. Hopefully these new agencies that are being developed will help to assist these shareholder groups in requiring good governance. But good governance is really where it comes down to. Regulatory agreements, loan agreements, all these rules, it's all about good governance. It's all about proper elections. It's all about properly elected boards. It's all about boards acting in the best interests of the corporate entity, which doesn't always mean in your own personal best interest. Sometimes it means they have to raise maintenance because that's what's required to pay the bills and keep the lights on and the water flowing and the roof from leaking. Those decisions are governed by your governing documents. Your bylaws, your certificate of incorporation, they dictate, and the law dictates, the Private Housing Finance Law, Article 11, whether you're a BCL co-op or a not-for-profit co-op, regardless under which statute you're governed with rules, elections, good governance, decision-making, powers that are vested in the board for a particular purpose. The purpose is to run the corporation properly. If you have $2 million of outstanding taxes and water, it only means one thing: your board didn't do its job. That's it. That's what it means. Now, can you bury your head and pretend it never happened? No. You fix it. You figure out how to fix it. One of the other topics will be resources, but resources go beyond money. Resources could be the HDFC down the block and their board members. Resources can be your elected officials. Resources can be the Harlem Development Center that's been established. Resources can be your attorneys. There are many resources. And the concept that HPD is there, they are there. They are a very good agency. They have all the right intentions. They do not have the manpower to force compliance in the 1,200 plus HDFCs.
So I have a question there. I don't mean to cut you off, but one, the first question is, how often should a building do, it's like a sort of a governance review of their documents? Is there a time period? Is it once a year? Is it once every 5 years? And then who should they be reaching out? Should they find a lawyer that can go over this? I mean, who does that? So for a lot of folks, it's like, you want me to do a governance review. Who should do that? Should it be an attorney? Should it be?
I mean, a little self-serving, but governance documents are legal documents. You should be going through your attorney. I see board members in the audience right now for buildings where we're currently revising their governance documents. How often? Once, really, really well. And then every few years, as you see, maybe something's not working, maybe there's new laws that have come into effect that require some updating. They're living, breathing bodies and beings, and they should live and breathe and develop with time. There's no strict rule that says every year, every 5 years, every 10 years. Every building should have an attorney. Every building should be able to go to their attorney for assistance with their governing documents. Not every building can afford one. So the resources are legal resources at the end of the day. But when you go to your attorney, what I will always tell a board is, let's talk about how you want to run your building. How do your shareholders want to run your building? And let's revise these documents so that they fit the law, but also your culture within your building. Because it really is about cooperative ownership and cooperative operation.
Heather, adding to that, what happens, so we canvassed about 40 buildings in West Harlem over the weekend to sort of let people know about this event. So we met a lot of people, and one of the, more than a few said, my board doesn't talk to me. What happens when there isn't that cohesion in a building, which is supposed to be democratic? How do you deal with shareholders that have one viewpoint, and then there's another group of shareholders that have a totally different viewpoint? What's the mechanism usually to sort of mediate that?
Well, it's tough. It kind of depends on a few things. Well, where the board comes down is one thing. It's helpful to have a board that, again, is functioning well. Boards can engage, for instance, in shareholder education. If there is a particular item that a board is interested in passing, particular item on its agenda, and it seems like there might be difficulty perhaps getting it done, the board can have advanced conversations with the shareholders, distribute materials, make sure that various points of view are represented, and spend time kind of fleshing out what are the pros and cons of whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, to just get shareholders really engaged in the process. And that in and of itself can help to alleviate a lot of disputes or just sort of differences in information or differences of opinion. So that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I find that people, this is their home, so they're very passionate about it, whether they agree or disagree. You're talking about where they live and where they've lived for a long time. So, people get set in, this is the way that it's always been done. And you get people who, it becomes this thing where we all live here. Do I hire an attorney and then go against this attorney or that attorney? So it's complicated. The mediation, though, ends up being like, what resource, if you sort of run its course and there's no thing? I mean, like, you can give us the bad news. Like, do you just have to go hire an attorney to sort of challenge that, or how does that usually work?
Well, so far, I haven't personally had to mediate any shareholder disputes, but I have seen situations where things get pretty nasty because of just some disagreement about how to interpret something, where you actually have like a shareholder coup. We want to prevent things from getting to that point, right? Everybody has obviously a big stake in where you're living, and I'd really like to hear from Paola how you've dealt with this in the past as a board member.
I think we're still looking for anyone who offers mediation services. Because I think one of the most difficult things, of course, is that, everyone has a huge stake in their home, but your home is not in a bubble. It's surrounded by other homes. So I think, honestly, the best way to deal with things is just meetings. Talking face to face. I think that there's a lot of boards, especially during the pandemic, those who may not have been so technically savvy, that were like, oh, we don't need to have meetings. It's fine. We're just going to send a memo, or But I think it's twofold. One is, yes, you have to communicate. You have to share information with each other. There are shareholders and people who live in the building that speak to everyone in the building. So that's a great way when you want to share information, when you want to get an idea of what's going on, is to really communicate to those shareholders and try to get the stakeholders in the building that really can't share the information with everyone else. But you should be having, as a board, you should be having monthly meetings with your board members. You should be doing either monthly meetings with your shareholders. If not, then it should be quarterly. It should not be that the only time that you're meeting with shareholders or that everyone can get in a room together is when there's an election or when there's an emergency. Because I think what happens happens is that people will hold in all those frustrations, and you're not able to address the issues that really are of importance at that particular moment. And I just think that, yeah, if there's, trust me, I've sat through, I have to mediate two shareholders who are just like not getting along, and it's not easy, and you're like, oh my God, but you have to have those meetings, you have to have those conversations. It's the only way that you can find some kind of consensus so that you can move forward. It's usually the thing that you don't want to do that you do need to do as a board or as shareholders. So that's the advice that I would give to y'all. And then, yeah, if anyone wants to start a company for mediation, man, you will have so much business, is what I'm gonna tell you.
So that's great. Yeah, I'm gonna rope Margie Brown back into this. So, you know, we are New Yorkers, and everybody in New York has a very staunch opinion on things, right? So we become experts in things, right? I've never lived in a rent-stabilized apartment, but, you know, I'm an expert on it because I've heard about it all my life, right? We're those type of people. HDFCs are in that category. Everybody thinks they're an expert on HDFC. They've never lived in them and they're whatever, but if you ask somebody on the street what's an HDFC, they will say, I know, because my cousin lives in one, or I know somebody who used to live in one. And they're sort of like that. What are the most common misconceptions about HDFCs that you find?
Yeah, I think one of the most common misconceptions, and I think this relates to the last question on regulation, is this misconception and rhetoric around failed HDFCs.
Yeah.
I think it is driving the push toward greater regulation and greater monitoring. And the truth is that over 80% of HDFCs currently, and this is held pretty steady, are in great physical and financial condition. They are healthy democracies, to use your term, and really well functioning. And then there are others that are in greater physical and financial distress. And number one, to talk about, you know, a smallish percentage, 15 to 20%, as representing the majority is just off. But also, the need for reinvestment is not a sign of failure. So many of these buildings went out the door from the city with very little investment. Over time, the city started putting more and more investment in these buildings, as well as in rental buildings that needed rehab, because there was a greater recognition that in order to get a building on its feet in good standing, it costs money. And so many of these buildings went out with very little investment, or in some cases, like poor rehab. And the people in these buildings have stewarded them for 30, 40, 50 years with no new reinvestment and have kept them going. That is an amazing success. That is a great story. And somehow we keep hearing failed HDFCs. And so you have one of the things that we are really concerned about is flipping the script on that, and to tell these success stories and to not let the conversation get bogged down in failure. So I think that is one of the myths, one of the misconceptions that we deal with as a community.
All right, so quickly, because I want to go into the next section of this, Ms. Soto, what do you think one of the most common misconceptions?
That it's, yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that. I think that we keep discussing what the failures are, what the shortcomings are, but we don't really focus on the fact that a lot of people put a lot of hard work into making their building work. A lot of all of the boards, right? They do it as a volunteer basis, which means that there's people who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and still then go home and make sure that the building is clean, make sure that the insurance is paid, look up whatever information they need to look up to get whatever issues happening in the building taken care of. And I don't think we do we put that up front enough, and that when there is struggle, the HDFC community depends on each other. And sometimes when there's not, sometimes when it's something like, I don't know what to do with this, how have you done it? They will speak to one another and they will really support, one HDFC supports another. And I just think that there's not enough focus on that, as well as being able to offer more educational opportunities for the people who are running these buildings and for the shareholders who are buying into this. I think that there's the sense that like I pay my maintenance and therefore I'm done, instead of like, hey, I really do need to know what's going on in this building and how can I help? Because every single year there's more regulations. Every single year there's a new report that needs to be handed in that a professional needs to make for your building. And it's just impossible to keep up, you know, like I don't know anything about boilers, or at least I didn't, but now I do. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, I don't want to spend my weekend looking up this information, but it's not enough to say that I pay my maintenance and that I don't disturb others. Therefore, I have done what I need to do for the HDFC. There is not enough help, y'all. There really isn't. There is not enough people in these buildings helping the people who are making it run and making it work. And the board needs the help. A lot of board members are older. They don't speak both languages. They're not tech savvy. You know, they're literally like something that may take me an hour to do because I can shoot off on email may take my other board member 2 days or 3 days because they have to get on the phone and call people because they're not sure how to use email. We really need to, like, it takes a village. It really does take a village. And I think a lot of people think, oh, my board has it. And it's like, y'all, they're tired. I know I was tired when I was on. It's like, we're tired. We work, we go to school, we then have to go and help with the building. And so please, if you're a shareholder, reach out to your board of directors and just ask what you can do and how you can help, because they need it.
Excellent. My next panel is going to be with just Ms. Soto because she's it. Common misconceptions, Heather? Just one, because we're trying to get to the next section. But is there like a myth out there about HDFCs that you're just like constantly trying to stomp out?
I think just that they're distressed. And I would just return to, the idea that, 70 to 80% of them are financially healthy. So, it is definitely a myth, and we need to be more focused on resources to help rather than looking at what some of the interim shortcomings may be.
Okay, and last, Ms. Lupu.
Leave me for last, and you have me thinking.
You've been doing that, yeah. That's why I saved your perspective.
I think it goes more than the absolute misconception that there's this falling apart financial and physical crisis overrunning the HDFC community. That's not reality. That is reality for a very small percentage. And I have to tell you, the deep reality is probably more like 5% that are in that really deep, deep trouble state. And I think even few, I don't know of any that have actually failed. So, but it's important to keep that on the back of your mind. But the real issue, and I see it all of the time when I speak to finance people or management companies for potential buildings of mine that perhaps might need a loan or the like, is that there is a lack of comprehension amongst the shareholders on what needs to be done. And while I don't deny that that might be the case in some instances, I think the level of sophistication of HDFC shareholders is underestimated. Years ago, somebody told me, a very wise man told me, that HDFC shareholders have the highest percentage of voters out of all buildings in the city. HDFC shareholders are both in mind frame, but also conscientious of their community and their surroundings. And if they are not provided with the education on the finance and the building structure, the stuff that you can Google, but not everybody knows how to Google. And even when you Google, you don't know what's right and what's wrong, and you don't have the financial resources for an attorney. It takes the little turnaround. But the misconception that there's a lack of sophistication, I think overall is wrong. I think it is as true as the conception concerning the financially distressed building. I think it's a minority of buildings, and I'm not saying they don't need the help. They definitely do. But these apartments are valuable assets because the communities are valuable. And I'm not talking about the buildings or the streets. I'm talking about internally the communities and the buildings. They are real communities, communities that people enjoy living in. People know their neighbors. In most of my regular co-ops, I have to ask the super who's living where. In my HDFCs, I can ask anyone. They can tell me anything that's going on in every apartment, not because they're nosy, but because they're friends, they're community. And that community is what builds and helps to sustain. And I think there is a massive misconception on the level of sophistication, which has to be overcome. I have this argument all the time with people, and that they just don't get it.
Thank you. We're going to change the conversation up now to probably the most, a subject that no one knows about, but everybody should know about because it's coming down the pike. And I was so surprised when I talked to people about Local Law 97. They're just like, huh? What is that? And these numbers get jumbled up. So Rosie, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to let you explain like what all of this environmental regulation stuff, how it impacts us. Just give us a sort of a summary of this.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to summarize it and condense it as best as I can. I think fundamentally, and I'm glad you highlighted Article 321, because that's what's going to be most relevant to this audience. First, I want to start off by saying that in 2019, the Climate Mobilization Act was passed, and it's still to this day one of the most ambitious climate laws in the whole world. And basically what it tried to set up is get New York City towards becoming climate neutral and diminishing the majority of its greenhouse gas emissions in the next several decades. That is very difficult. And the way that basically the main strategy of the city is through fines. So obviously it's a very contentious topic. I think we all admire the intention and all want to live in a resilient, healthy city, state, country, world. But I think there is a lot of ambiguity, a lot of just questions about how this is going to affect people day to day because it's a really big change. So with Local Law 97, as I mentioned, there's a fine structure that's going to happen during several different timelines until 2050 in order to try to move buildings into being carbon neutral. There is an alternative compliance pathway available to what is being called affordable housing within Local Law 97, and this designation pertains to HDFCs. So if a building is an HDFC, it can comply through this alternate pathway, which provides two different compliance pathways. So instead of having to pay a fine potentially every 5 years, if you're not doing the capital improvements through energy efficiencies to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions below your limit, you would be fined. Affordable housing and HDFCs have the availability of doing either 13 prescriptive measures with contractors such as Carlton, which Mark we'll talk about in a little bit. Or if your building is performing pretty well and is under its 2030 limit, you can comply through the 2030 pathway, which means you would just have to create a report with an engineer and an architect and have that submitted to the Department of Buildings by May 2025. But yeah, go for it.
So they have some wonderful documents, and I hear this, and I read it myself, and I'm relatively educated, and it just was like me looking at a wall. My biggest question is, how do I find out if my building has to respond to this and what level of it is? You know, like how do we get that kind of basic information as a starting point?
Yeah, I want to highlight, so I'm an account manager with the New York City Accelerator, so I want to shout out that program first and foremost. It's a free service that was created by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and Environmental Justice for this purpose in order to give guidance and assistance to all the buildings, which there are several. I believe last time I pulled some data, it's about 100,000 buildings that are going to have to comply with this law in the next few years. So this is a service that is available for free for buildings to not only learn if they're subject, what are their compliance pathways based on the context of their building, but also what are other resources? Are there incentives available? Which contractors are reliable? Who can I go to do this work? When do I submit? Where do I submit? So myself, my colleagues, we want to make ourselves available to answer all these questions and make sure that we're providing all the information that's available and letting you know when the information that's not available is available so that you can make these informed decisions within a timeline that is manageable and feasible, because again, 2024 is a big year for HDFCs that people should really keep in mind to look to what compliance pathway they're going to pursue.
You're about to start hearing a lot about it. And Marco, I'm going to bring you in on this conversation. Please, because so you know that I'm not making this up, tell us what the title of the person who's authorized by the city to do this is.
Licensed retro commissioning agent.
Licensed retro commissioning agent. Has anybody ever heard of this before? Right. When I first saw this, I'm like, really? What? So please explain, one, those parameters again and what a licensed retro commissioning agent is supposed to do.
Definitely.
To help HDFCs, which are exempted, right? Can you explain that kind of sort of?
Yeah, definitely. I'll go into a little bit more detail on what Vince was talking about before. I think in order to really grasp the Local Law 97, it's important to kind of explain, and I won't name all 1,000 local laws in New York City, but there are associative energy local laws that sort of interconnect and tie together, but they are separate laws and services. So I just want to kind of briefly go over those just because, to use your words, there's some misconceptions out there about Local Law 97, energy letter grades, for instance. So just to kind of explain what those are and what the city is going to basically be looking for. Local Law 84-133 is how the city is basically gathering this data. It's been around for several years. If you haven't heard of it, your building probably does it or it would be getting fined. What Local Law 84-133, it's called annual benchmarking. What the benchmarking is, I like to use the analogy of, it's like filing an income tax return for your building's energy use. So every single year, by May 1st, you have to submit the prior year's data. For the last 10 years, it did not matter what your data was. It can be up, down, left, right, and center. As long as you submitted this report, you didn't get fined. If you didn't submit the report, slap on the wrist, a $500 fine. Then a couple of years ago, the city passed Local Law 33. That's these colorful energy efficiency rating labels. I'm sure you all have A's outside your doors. That's what the Local Law 33 is. A big misconception that these energy efficiency rating labels have any correlation with Local Law 97. Just to give you guys a reference, at Carlton Energy Consulting, we benchmark just in New York City alone over 4,000 buildings. We have hundreds of buildings that have D letter grades that are not on pace to receive fines, and A's and B's that are. We didn't make the rule up. Basically, the disconnect here is the Local Law 33 letter grades, you're graded off of a curve. So let's just say, for instance, your 50,000 square foot building in the Bronx is being compared to a 50,000 square foot building up the block in Brooklyn, in Queens, so on and so forth. The reason why there's a disconnect is Local Law 97 is just your building, its size and its use type with a carbon emissions limit. The reason why there's that disconnect is you have vacant buildings, you have buildings that are being incorrectly filed, you have buildings that have estimated meter readings. So constantly all around the city, your building could be being unfairly, compared to another building. Your building can be on pace for fines and you have an A and you would have no idea. I kind of like to explain this to scare people into paying attention when I have these sort of meetings. I told you that the benchmarking was a slap on the wrist. It's a $500 penalty each quarter in a given year. The Local Law 97, starting in 2025, for lack of compliance, even if you're the most efficient building in the city, if you submit a report late or inaccurately, it's a 50 cent per square foot of the overall size of the building in fines per month. So a 50,000 square foot building would get a $25,000 fine every single month until that emissions analysis is submitted correctly. Also, free market buildings, before I get to the HDFC co-ops, they have these annual emissions requirements every single year starting next year. So in May of 2025, when you submit your 2024 energy data, every building has a strict carbon cap. If your building is over that limit starting next year, you can get fined. Out of our clients, we have some buildings that are on pace for hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines next year. To make matters worse, like Rosie was saying before, you have an annual emissions limit every year. Starting in 2030, that limit is then lowered. Just to give you guys an idea, 20% of buildings, you said how many buildings have to benchmark, are on pace for fines next year, and almost 80% of buildings are on pace for fines based off of the 2030 limits. So now that I scared everybody into paying attention, the very, very big benefit of being an HDFC co-op, as we were just alluding to, is that you have an alternate pathway for compliance. So basically, instead of having to abide by this very, very strict carbon limit, let's say, for instance, if you're on pace for $50,000 in fines next year, that doesn't mean you just pay $50,000 and you're in compliance. That means you have to probably do $300,000 worth of retro-commissioning work or energy efficiency measures and cross your fingers that you get under that threshold. Then you have to cross your fingers that you did enough before that 2030 limit comes in when your limits are almost cut in half. What HDFC co-ops have to do, instead of obviously this very, very strict limit, 2 compliance pathways. You either A, can show in 2025 that your next year's limits in 2024 were so low that it beats that 2030 limit, which, like I said, it's very, very difficult to do, although it's possible, or you complete the 13 prescriptive measure pathway, which in essence is a much better option. And the benefit of being in that camp is once you do one of those 2 things after May of 2025, HDFC co-ops, Section 8 housings, affordable housing buildings don't have to do anything for the foreseeable future.
So, no, this is a good question. No, you actually were helpful. If you have a question, because we're live streaming this, we have some folks at the end. They'll give you a sheet. You can write your question down, send it to me, and I'll ask it. Okay, you're talking about these 13 measures and this prescriptive pathway. Rosie, can you start us out and give us some detail on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to give a little insight.
Because I want that option.
Yeah,
the other option
yeah.
sounds too complicated. You scared the good Jesus out of me.
It's scary. It's scary stuff. It can be expensive, but again, the whole idea behind the retro commissioning, or factually the 13 prescriptive measures, which are based off of retro commissioning measures from Local Law 87, is that unlike market rate buildings, which will probably have to do complete overhauls of their heating systems to be on track to be efficient enough to be below their greenhouse gas emission limits, these 13 measures, what the intention of these measures are to make sure that your existing system is operating as the manufacturer intended, so that it's working at its max capacity rather than you completely having to transition to a new heating system that could be very, very costly. So the way that I like to describe the 13 measures are under 3 major buckets. So we have operation and maintenance. So that includes checking the set points of the temperature. If your water is scalding in whatever unit you are, likelihood is that your temperature at your domestic hot water boiler is too high. There's making sure that there's no system leaks and making sure that it's operating effectively. So there's some measures that are pretty much just making sure that the system isn't broken, there aren't any overt leaks or defaults that need to be addressed quickly in order to make sure that the system is working as it's supposed to.
Margie, can you jump in here, and what are you seeing around this? Are buildings talking about this that you guys are working with?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely an area where UHub has started getting a lot of questions, and the educational component is just so important. I think there's been a lot of fear around it because there is so much talk about it more broadly, how it applies to market rate buildings and larger buildings. And so the educational component of, does this apply to your building? And I will say there are about 1,300 co-ops, HDFC co-ops across the city. And this really only applies to about 350 of those because the threshold is 25,000 square feet. I'm learning. And so that's not every building. And that correlates to roughly 25 to 30 units. There are a lot of HDFCs that are 20 and below. But those 350 really need the information. And Rosie and Accelerator have just been a great partner for UHAB in getting the word out there. So we do online and in-person educational seminars about this, and having Accelerator there to really give this very detailed information has been absolutely key in that.
Marco, 2 questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll quickly go through the bucket. So there is operation and maintenance, and these are applicable measures. So there's a bucket for steam buildings. So there's 3 measures for steam buildings that they would have to implement if they fall under that category. And then we have some heating and energy efficiency broad measures that would have to be completed. And we're happy to share that list with you all, connect, and talk you through if it's even applicable to you all. And again, I have clients that work with Marco and his team and are getting those prescriptive measure surveys now, which I hope everyone gets soon. And they've been great in really being able to create a work scope for them to understand what the work is in the coming year that they have to complete.
This was, whoever wrote this question, excellent question, because that was going to be my next question. And I was going to ask it to Marco. So this, I hear this a lot. You know, this stuff only applies to those big buildings now, but the fear is that it's a sliding scale and it's going to go down. And I think there's some examples of how the law starts at 25,000 square feet, and then it quickly moves down to 10,000 square feet, which would then include everybody. How does that have, what?
Great question.
Is there something to that?
Basically, so I had mentioned before, annual benchmarking, it's called Local Law 84/133. The reason why there's 2 numbers associated with the benchmarking law is it was originally a 50,000 square foot building and above law only. They then lowered the criteria to 25,000 square foot buildings a couple of years after that. And now, currently, there is a bill on the City Council's desk, I believe, to lower the benchmarking criteria to 10,000 square foot buildings. Now, it didn't say that the emissions in Local Law 97 per se is going to be in that, but we're assuming it's only a matter of time. To build off that more, I mentioned we benchmark 4,000 buildings just in New York City. We also benchmark buildings across the country. So every major city right now does, almost every major city, I should say, has to file an annual benchmarking report, and all of those cities have their own associative local laws or energy local laws surrounded. Chicago, St. Louis, Seattle, Boston, Washington, D.C., Orlando, St. Louis, and just to give you an idea, New York City is the most ambitious with the Local Law 97, but Boston recently passed BERDO 2.0, it's called, which is also an emissions limit, and Washington, which is basically mirrored around New York City's Local Law 97, and Washington, D.C. also has an emissions limit. So while a lot of our clients are trying to kind of push back, not the HDFCs, but a lot of our free market clients that I sit across from them, and I unfortunately tell them that they're going to have to probably spend a few $100,000 and then probably a few $1 million, they basically kind of, shove it back and say, the laws are going to change, I'm not going to have to worry about this. And we're kind of trying to be, pessimistically explain, maybe the parameters will change, maybe the goalposts will change, but this seems like something that's spreading very, very rapidly and very, very quickly. It's something that's not going to disappear anytime soon.
Yeah, so a couple of housekeeping issues here. I have 4 questions here. I'm going to give these back. Can you write your name and your email on these questions? Can you guys come and get these? Because I'm going to have every question answered. So if people have a question and we can't get to it tonight because we have a limited time period, I will make sure if you write your name and your email on it that the question is answered directly by either one of these panelists or somebody who can answer the question. On that note, is everybody cool to continue going, or do we need to take a 10-minute break, restroom break, water break, so that we can come back and finish up on the finance side? Break? Let's see a hand for break. Okay, we got enough for a break. Let's take a 10-minute break. If it is 7:50, if we can all come back right at 8 o'clock, because we're going to start on the finance section of this. And if anybody needs to write a question down, there are two folks who are handing out sheets. Ask the question. I will get it answered for you. Make sure you leave your email address so that I can get back to you. So let's get started again. I have several questions here, which I had the opportunity to look through. I'm going to ask one and then transition into the next section. I promise you, if you have a question, there are people distributing sheets. If we can't get it tonight because we have limited time, I will make sure if you put your email address, your phone number on there, that I will get it answered, and we will send you an answer for it. We will also post it on our website, so it'll be the question and the answer to it, so people have access to it. It's unfortunately a hard stop, and it's going to be 8:30 when we finish. So we want to make sure that we get to as many as we can. Now, I got this question. It's more numbers, so I'm going to ask it because so let me just ask it because I'm confused. What input might the new J51 replacement affordable housing rehabilitation program in A07758 have in terms of being pressure for buildings to afford local law 97's compliant projects or other capital projects? Does that make sense?
I'll pretend it does.
What is J51?
But
what is J51?
I'm not sure.
I can
Tax
answer that.
abatements.
Okay.
J51 is a reduction in real estate taxes based on capital improvements that you've done. And you have to file with the city and they'll give you some level of credit, but it's in the form of real estate tax reduction that's transferred over a 12-year period.
Gotcha. So does that have any implications for local law 97 compliance projects or other capital projects? To anybody's knowledge?
The 13 measures, I don't know if they would be considered capital.
Okay.
That's the idea of them, that they're not, they're not a few $100,000 or a few $1 million. They're considered low-hanging fruit, practical energy conservation measures, and that's why the city sort of stipulated the Section 8 housing, HDFC co-ops, buildings that don't have, all of these reserves, that they basically said, you guys can afford to do this.
Yeah, I have another question here that I think you can probably answer. This is for Rosie. So so the retro commissioning agent who has to come out and sort of do this, how do you pay for it? Does the city have any funds available to help buildings pay for this?
Not for that, unfortunately. What I will say is that there's a great program called the Affordable Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program. I know, very quick and succinct. But HDFCs are eligible for this program, and basically it incentivizes pretty much every single one of the 13 energy efficiency measures. So happy to connect you all. Again, Accelerator NYC, happy to give my card around and connect you to that program, which can help pay for these improvements, because they are improvements. They're going to help with operational costs as well, but these things that you'll have to do if you're over 25,000 square feet in order to avoid fines. So,
and they've also put these really informative documents together. I'm going to put some links up on our website page, westharlemdc.org/HDFC, and you can get those links there, which will direct you to the links to the Accelerator program. My last question around the energy stuff. How much does it cost to do an assessment for a building?
We get that call all the time. I mean, the assessment, it depends on the building. Our cost usually is around $5,000 for a light energy audit. It goes up based off of size and complexity. A lot of times people ask, what is it going to cost me to do the prescriptive plan? Buildings, we like to say they're like a snowflake or a fingerprint. Every single building is built differently. Like Rosie said, we've already done, because we've been advising our clients for the last year and a half that we've known about this, we've already done 250 walkthroughs. About 60 of those buildings have already completed their prescriptive pathway. We have another 300 in the pipeline. Some buildings, they had most of their insulation done. They already had an online boiler control, adjusting temperature set points, things that are very simple for your boiler service contractor to do. Some of them it cost under $20,000 or $30,000. Other buildings that never had to do in Local Law 87 that we didn't get into detail with, those can cost $150,000. None of their pipes are insulated. They need massive venting work. They don't have LED lighting. Maybe they missed the boat on a rebate program for LED lighting.
So it's an exhaustive review of the building and the property. So this is another question then. Outside of the cost, how long would it take to have somebody come and do this? Like, if you want to get a contractor to come, it might take you a month to get somebody to come out.
Great question. That's why we're advising our clients. Forget even now, within the next couple of months, there's going to be a mad dash for this. Right. So forget even the contractors, but just maybe the supply chain issues that every single building that runs on steam traps, everybody's going to be ordering new steam traps, insulation, the costs are going to go up. For us, we only would have to do maybe 1 or 2 site visits to really give you this comprehensive report to tell you what you have to do and what you don't have to do. Then once you get that report, it can take you, a few months. It can take you 8 months. It really depends on the building.
Okay. Now, we have about a half an hour left, and I'm going to go through to the most scintillating part of the conversation, even though it's all been great up to this point. The part that everybody wants to know about, where the dollar stops. I get more conversation and people as we reach out to them. It's where can I get money? Why is stuff so expensive? The finance question. So my 2 finance folks, one, I want you to sort of go through what you need when you're looking at finance and the general strokes of sort of what buildings, boards, shareholders need to be thinking about when it comes to putting a package together for regular maintenance, for prescriptive stuff that they may have to do around Local Law 97, for catastrophic things that happen, for building replacements, roof replacements, things like that. I need a significant amount of money for my building, and our shareholders are looking at doing something. What do I need to start getting together, and what are my avenues to explore to do that?
Thank you for the question, and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a pleasure to be here.
Avi Geller.
From Meridian Capital, thank you. With any loan application, lenders are going to typically ask for the same things. They're going to want to see your financials, your audited annual financial statements. They're going to want to see your current maintenance roll, a comprehensive budget that's balanced, without deficit. They're going to want to see your arrears, your maintenance arrears, because that's critical in today's financing world. Banks want to see that the building is raising enough money to pay all their expenses. And if you're undergoing some major capital projects, Local Law 11, Local Law 97, if you're undergoing some major capital projects, the banks are going to want to see that the co-op has a plan, has the appropriate meetings with engineers, with contractors, and that there's a plan in place for that work so that the bank knows that you're doing your due diligence and responsibilities to address your capital needs and repairs. What was the second question?
Yeah, so my next question really is, what are my options as a building, as an HDFC co-op? How do you structure? Is it a loan? Is it a mortgage? What is it? What's available?
So, excellent question. So, HDFC co-ops, free market co-ops, any co-op for that matter, there's definitely loan programs available. It doesn't matter, the status. Banks are just going to want to make sure that the financials are good, the budgets, the maintenance, the arrears, everything is in check. Once you have all that done, there's a variety of loan programs available, custom tailored to fit a co-op's needs. Because as we've been saying tonight with all our panelists, every co-op, every board, every building is different, with different issues, different structures, different personalities. You could write very good comedy TV if there's any writers here on what goes on at co-op boards. So my company is very good at custom tailoring loan programs for co-ops as they come to us with the variety of needs. We can custom tailor. We have loan programs from 3-year terms to 35-year terms, depending on what you need to do, how much money you need to borrow, what kind of work you need to do, and what kind of issues you're facing within the building also is going to be a huge factor as to what loan programs are available to you. So there's a lot of moving parts. Hiring a mortgage expert, a financial expert, is critical into navigating those waters. And with banking world, banks are coming and going in the market every single day, right? We got banks, unfortunately, collapsing. We got banks that are stepping into the space to take the new business that's available. Being able to navigate that space and to know which lenders are going to give you the best financing options for your co-op is key.
Now, I went to my bank, which is a big bank. Everybody's heard of it, and they told me they do not loan to HDFCs.
That's a common that's a common issue that we see a lot with many HDFC co-ops. They think that the bank that they bank their reserve account with is going to be receptive to giving them an underlying mortgage, or maybe their management company has a relationship with a bank that they have all their operating accounts with, and they are going to get their HDFC co-op buildings a mortgage. It could even be that when you do find a bank that's going to give you an HDFC mortgage, they're going to give you a very high interest rate. They're going to give you a very high prepayment penalty, high closing costs. It may not even be the best bank for you. So again, going back to the navigation, it's all about the navigation. You want to be able to know who all the lenders and players are in the space. You want to be able to see all the lenders and players in the space and what they're offering you. And then as a board, with your attorney and with your manager and with your accountant especially, make an educated decision that gets you all the money you need to do all the work that needs to be done and maintain the value of your building.
Well, my building, we tried to get a loan about 5 years ago and they turned us down. So we basically took up a collection and we did the repair ourselves. But now we need to do something else and we need to get a loan. Like, what do we need to do to have a yes this time? What's going on?
So if you were to call a mortgage professional, if somebody were to call me and say, I have an HDFC co-op, I need a loan, we have a number of lenders that we are on top of that we know are going to grant HDFC, that do grant HDFC co-op financing. We'll apply to them. We'll navigate whatever issues the building is dealing with regards to maintenance, arrears, or taxes, or water sewer charges that are outstanding, among other issues that we've seen. And we will apply to those lenders and work with them to fit the co-op into those programs and get them the loan that they need on the terms that make sense for them and that they can afford. Definitely doable.
The affordable part, and then I'm going to bridge into the insurance because this goes into that. The rent is too darn high. For this audience, the maintenance payments are too darn high and they keep going up. Like, if we've got to say we need to replace the roof, or we need to go from an oil burner to a new, heating source, and it's going to cost us $100,000, $200,000. Where's that money going to come from, and how are we going to be able to minimize the impact to our maintenance? What do you look at in structure? How do you structure it?
So a co-op has three ways of raising funds needed to address a capital project or repair or a project in the building. There's three. One is a maintenance increase, which nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to deal with, but listen, regular maintenance increases are needed and normal as long as they look like they're planned by the board to address, the upcoming year's expense increases and cost of living and everything else. That's number one. Number two is an emergency assessment. If the elevator breaks down and the contractor wants $80,000, so you're not going to necessarily go get a mortgage for $80,000 if you don't have one. So you'll do a short-term assessment, 6 months, 12 months to pay out the contractor for the work that he's going to do. That's number two. When you have a very big project, a roof, lobby modernizations, window replacement, whatever it may be, the mortgage is going to be your cheapest option because you can get a longer-term loan, stretch out the monthly payments, reduce the monthly payments, over a longer period of time, and get the money that you need to do all that work in a timely manner without having to raise the maintenance in the real time, without having to do short-term assessments, which everybody feels in real time. A mortgage payment's going to be a lot smaller as for the entire building to address, to pay than the other two options. So those are the three options. And when you apply for a mortgage, as we said before, it's just knowing who the lenders are, what the rates are, what programs are available, and how we can tweak it to be affordable to each and every building that comes to us.
Are there a lot of lenders out there that do this, or is it a limited number?
For HDFCs, unfortunately, no, but the landscape is ever changing, and we hope that with what's been going on in the news lately, that there are going to be lenders that are going to pick up the slack from the lenders that have dropped out.
If I get a loan from an entity, are they going to require me to take all of our operating money and put it with that entity?
So
I've been with this bank for a long time. I like the teller who helps me.
I want to choose my words very carefully. Look, and this is real talk. We all know the banks that have been recently coming up in the news and having their issues, and they're no longer with us, unfortunately. Rest in peace, Sis. So every other bank is going to do what they can to avoid being next on that list, and that's going to be accounts. Because if you paid attention to I don't want to say their names. If you paid attention to those banks that are not with us anymore, the number one issue that most of them were having was that they were a run on the banks. Everybody was pulling money out of their accounts and moving them to higher interest rate loan products, money market accounts, et cetera, from other banks. So every other bank was like, okay, we're not going to be next on that list. So we're going to, when a loan comes across our desk for a building, we're going to mandate that they have to keep accounts with us, whether it's, a reserve account or an operating account or a checking account, a money market, whatever it is. That's where we come in. Operating accounts are a very big problem for a lot of our buildings because the management company has an umbrella network of operating accounts typically at one specific bank, which is why the HDFC financing issue comes up, because the management companies will go to that particular bank and they'll say, well, I have all my operating accounts with you, so why can't I just get a mortgage for my building? And they just don't do it. So when we go to our banks, the number one message to them up front is typically, look, you're going to ask for the operating account, you're not going to get it. They're professionally managed by XYZ management company. So in lieu of that, let's negotiate. Let's come up with a plan that the bank is happy with, that the building can accept, and the management company can accept, and get it done. And we're very, very successful at this. I've had just recently, it wasn't an HDFC co-op, but the fact that it is still the same. It came to us, the bank was very hard pressed for operating accounts, and at the closing, which is going to be tomorrow, there is no operating account, and the only account requirement was a $15,000 reserve account. So we were very, very happy with that. But yes, every bank is going to initially come at the building with account requirements, and it's negotiable. It's all negotiable, thankfully. So we can get around that.
Well, we've already established that the maintenance is too high. This past year, all of us woke up to our annual premium insurance increases for fire and liability insurance, and we were like, what the heck happened? Can you explain this, Michael? If everybody doesn't know, the fire and liability insurance, which every building is required to have, there was like a dramatic increase this year in it, and a lot of folks were just mystified as to why the insurance premiums went up so dramatically in a short period of time.
I'll try to answer this question the best I can. It's definitely a fully loaded question, and even if we go till 9 o'clock, I may not be able to answer
he explained it to me earlier. Yeah, exactly.
There's a few components with regards to the insurance. So every building, every co-op, and not just HDFCs, but every co-op has several insurance policies. You have the package, which is otherwise known as the package, but what are really the components of that are the general liability, the property. And then there's the umbrella, which we'll get to. And then there's directors and officers, crime, workers' comp, and all the other ancillary policies. The number one increase that happened over the last, I'd say more like 3 years, is to the umbrella insurance, which a lot of you have heard of. Just to give you a quick understanding of what umbrella insurance is, it's additional liability protection. That's all it is. So if somebody will slip and fall, hurt themselves in any other way, a contractor's doing work on the building and an employee hurts themselves, they're going to get money from general liability. However, if your underlying limits, which are generally $1 million over 2, are exhausted, we're going to dip into the umbrella. Up until 3 years ago, and since I've been in business about 15 years, you were able to get $100 million umbrella policy for a building, 75 units, for about $3,000. That was going on for many years, and everybody was like, hey, $100 million, give me $200, whatever you charge, it's fine, a few $100 more, we'll take it. And everybody got very comfortable with that. And what happened was about 3.5 years ago, there were a few big labor law claims that were paid out, which caused, for other reasons too, but it's the main reason why some of the umbrella programs fell apart. And when these umbrella programs fell apart, there were very few left. And when there's less competition, obviously you know what happens. Today, there are only 3 umbrella programs that are actively writing business. that's a problem because at a building that was paying $3,000 for a $100 million umbrella 3.5 years ago can be paying $20,000 for a $5 million umbrella, and they're happy to get it. Okay, that's where we are right now. And again, due to the large awarded labor law claims that happened over the past few years, that's definitely a big factor. In general, in New York, trip and fall claims, I see settlements all the time, way, way, way beyond what I feel or anybody feels people deserve. It's a new way of making money since people have a hard time, I guess, getting job, even though last time I checked, there's a lot of job opportunities. But people are taking advantage of the system, slipping and falling, tripping and falling, or causing themselves to trip and fall. So that's number one. Number two, if you all know, I mean, you probably do, construction costs have gone up just like everything else. But not just like everything else, a lot more than everything else. I'm in the process of building a home, and somebody next door to me built a very similar type of home 4 years ago, and his construction cost was about 45% less than mine. So construction costs have gone up tremendously. When we're calculating what a building should be insured for, in terms of their fire or otherwise known as property insurance, we're calculating based on the square feet of the building and what it would cost per square foot. So if you're a masonry non-combustible building, you're going to be, we estimate a certain amount. We have Marshall and Swift raters in the office.
That's replacement cost.
That's replacement cost, yeah. So the replacement cost has gone up tremendously. Like I said, some replacement costs have been, there's an automatic inflation guard in many policies of about 4%. In the past 3 years, they've gone up by 30-40%. So we have to catch up with that. And here, building by building, insurance companies are waking up and saying, hey, we're insuring this 50,000 square foot building at a replacement cost of $8 million. If this building burns down tomorrow, the replacement cost is going to be more like $13 million. And therefore, they're raising the replacement cost, which obviously, causes the premium to go up. And then you have the general liability, which also, 5 years ago, I was looking at for, standard co-ops, I was looking at $100 to $150 a door. Now I'm looking at like $200 to $250 for a good, perfectly, clean claims history building. And it can go up way north from that. Again, due to labor law, settlements, other type of, injury settlements, which have been awarded. When it comes to HDFC specific co-ops, there's kind of a myth out there. I will say there are some carriers that will not look at you. Your affordable housing, we don't want to look at you. They see you as an increased exposure, maybe for the myths that others were talking about, that HDFCs are all failing and their infrastructures are crumbling. It's not the case. But there are some carriers that will not insure you if you're an HDFC. But for the most part, if you are an HDFC, and there are people in this audience who I insure their building, and they are HDFCs, they're insured with GNY, Greater New York. They're insured with Admiral Berkshire. These are the premier insurance companies in New York City. And there is this myth out there that if you're an HDFC, you can't get insurance. You got to be in one of these programs or whatnot. It's not true. If you're an HDFC that's operating properly, you have a financially stable building, you have a building infrastructure that's well maintained and up to par, you'll get a rate very similar to any other building in the city. But if you're a crumpling HDFC, don't blame it on the fact that you're an HDFC. Blame it on the fact that you're a crumpling building, and that's why you're being surcharged, because you're not favorable. Let me tell you something, insurance companies got a lot smarter these days. They check up every single building on Google, on the Prominent Buildings website, on the HPDA website. If they say you got 75 violations, for a whole slew of reasons, nobody wants to insure you. And guess what? If you weren't an HDFC and you were a regular freestanding co-op, you wouldn't either be able to get insurance, only with excess and surplus lines. So don't be fooled by the myth out there that HDFCs are all the same. They're not. There are many HDFCs that get regular insurance like any other building. And if you're crumpling, then you got to do something about that to avoid continued increases, or maybe nobody wanting to insure you, and that could be a big problem down the road.
Margie, your organization, was right in the middle of this, back and forth, and I saw so many emails during that time period. You guys did a great job of explaining it, but can you explain sort of like where, from your perspective, what was going on? And bigger, is it going to continue to go on? That's the issue. These premiums, is it annual?
Annual.
Yeah. So next year, is it going to be the same issue?
Yeah, thank you. Your explanation of the market challenges was just spot on, so great. And so UHAB helps to coordinate a insurance program like the one he was talking about. It is one that we in various forms UHAB creates cooperation among cooperatives. And one way we do that is to increase purchasing power among cooperatives. And so we have for, I believe, 40 years had an insurance program that it is just working with an insurance provider to bring together a resource for cooperatives. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that, especially going back in time, but still today, we see insurers saying to cooperatives that they will not insure them in particular areas of the city, which more previously, but still now in some neighborhoods in Harlem, certainly neighborhoods in the Bronx, saying we will not insure. And so our role is to create cooperation and to create a joint program to say we will come in together. And over time, it has helped to keep the highs. It helps to mitigate the highs and lows. And so it is just kind of a steadier path to than the market. This past year, we did have really tough increases and really worked closely with the insurer to bring those down as much as possible. And they were high. It was a tough time. And so, UHAB is here to create the resource, but we did have people leave the program. And, that is fine. Independent decision-making is what we encourage among cooperatives. But that said, it is really important to us to always remember that as a community, we are stronger together. Vincent, when you said before that you have heard from so many banks that they will not lend to HDFCs as this blanket statement. When we hear we will not insure HDFCs in certain neighborhoods or affordable housing overall, it makes my blood boil. And when you look at a map of HDFCs and overlay that with a map of redlined districts, they are almost identical. And so banks saying today, we will not lend to HDFCs, insurers saying, we will not insure, that is redlining. It is a new form of redlining. As a community of 25,000 cooperative shareholders, we need to come together to push back on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. In New York City, it becomes this thing, and this is something to think about, where it's building by building. So the redlining can be like a line on a block as opposed to a line for a different neighborhood, because you have these buildings that are, and many times in this area, desirable neighborhoods, but they'll lend to this building but won't lend to that building. Or the HDFC building gets the short end of the strip on a building with nothing but market rate, properties on it. So that's a good point. I'm going to take a minute now to acknowledge all of our community board people here. I know I saw the current chair of the community board who's here. Your term is ending, and is the new chair that's coming? Is Victor? He was. Okay.
Vince, can I say one thing?
Victor was here.
I
Yes.
apologize. I just want to conclude with one thing. Just one thing. It's not all doom and gloom. And listening to all the panelists here, they're all experts, it sounds like, in their fields. And there's a lot of resources out there. and where we come from, it's all about who you know and the resources that you can obtain to utilize for yourselves. As long as you guys can work together as a community, right? That's the word that we keep throwing out tonight. As long as you guys can work together individually as a building, as a board, as a community, and talk to your neighbors, right? If one building next door is, got something better on their insurance that you heard of, talk to them. If a building next door did something with their mortgage and got a really affordable rate, talk to them. If you guys can utilize that information and talk to the professionals, the accountants, the attorneys, the insurance providers, you guys have so much here that you can utilize to help build yourselves into a very good, strong financial position.
When the finance guy says it's not all doom and gloom, it gives me hope.
Right, it's not all doom and gloom, guys. It's going to be, okay.
Community Board 9 members, raise your hand. Thank you for coming out. All right. District leaders, there's some district leaders here. Can you raise your hand and acknowledge yourself? Yay. And then, last but not least, my colleagues. We got a couple of board members from the West Harlem Development Corporation here. Darlene, Greg, you guys met Zayad earlier. Stand up, say hello. Did Pat Watler Johnson leave? She's on our board and she's a member of Community Board 9. She left? Or she's still here. I'll shout her out when she comes back in. Now, I got 2 more questions, all right? And I want Emanuela, Ms. Lupu, can you please go this? What's coming down the pike? Are there any things that we need to be worried about? Or are there things being discussed in the city council or at the state level, pending legislation, stuff that needs to be on our radar to pay attention to?
Ton of it. So when you introduced me, you mentioned that I was an attorney, partner in firm, represents hundreds of co-ops and condos, and also that I do pro bono work for the HDFC Coalition. The HDFC Coalition is literally a coalition of HDFC shareholders that was formed many years ago to help with this, to help track the legislation coming down the pike, to help with the elected officials, to protect the shareholders. It all really came together many years ago when the city was looking to early sunset that fabulous real estate tax exemption. And a couple of my board members were on the coalition, brought me in, and we fought. I sat with council members. I sat with state senators. They were grassroots, on the ground, tens of thousands of members. There are thousands of HDFC shareholders that have prescribed. And a lot of that is on their website available as it's happening, but there is a lot of legislation coming down the pike, legislation that is intended to reinstate the Big Brother element, which, I don't know, I read George Orwell's 1983 in high school, or was 1984, there you go, and I don't even remember the name of it. But the Big Brother concept is something that a lot of people are resistant to. And since we're here talking about HDFCs and all the things that are available and accessible, because the majority of buildings are healthy and in good shape, that's something that's resistant. So they're there to provide resources like insurance brokers, mortgage people, lawyers, to give them advice, to answer questions, to give guidance to each other, your fellow neighbors. Maybe you don't know the guy from the HDFC down the block, but you have access to others. But as far as the legislation coming down, there has been it continues to be a push on legislation that will try to force regulatory agreements down the throats of HDFCs, and whether you like it or not. In fact, the current state of affairs is such that it looks like if they're going to extend any kind of tax credits, you'll have to sign a new 40-year regulatory agreement, which is much more restrictive than what most buildings have. And while in some instances regulatory agreements are necessary because they don't have good corporate governance, it is a misconception, as everybody has set up here the entire time, that that's the norm in HDFCs. Most buildings, the overwhelming majority, supermajority of buildings, are functioning properly. They don't require a souped up regulatory agreement from an agency that can't even really effectively control or monitor them, because HPD does not have the manpower to do that. And it is imperative, and I've said this before and I'm saying it again, I sound more like a politician than a lawyer, but in this instance, I am a politician for my buildings, for my HDFCs, about protecting them and allowing them to continue to function well, because that's my job, is to help them function well and then allow them to do it. So I think that when we talk about prospective legislation, there is a lot of it out there, and I do encourage you guys to take a look at the coalition's website and see what is out there and pending as it comes up, and join the efforts to combat what you don't like. You go out and you vote, but that's not enough. Join the efforts to combat what doesn't suit you, because this is a democracy and you are the highest voter population of all buildings in New York City. You need to use that to your advantage.
Well, the benefit of being a moderator is that I get the last word. First of all, I want to say thank you for everybody for coming out. The second thing I want to say is, listen, it is impossible to have a forum to dig deep enough into all of these issues to give everybody the answer that they need at the time. This is the first step of what we're trying to do with the Resource Center, to actually start these dialogues around these issues that, as we have heard so eloquently from this distinguished set of panelists, are ever changing in New York. So one requirement today might be different tomorrow, or there may be a new one next week, or what have you. So we're building a resource center that will be, number one, a place where people can go to get that first step, so that we can refer you out to folks that we're working with, to professionals who actually have the knowledge and the resource to sort of get you started. So with that, I thought when we started this that there was going to be like a book I could go to and have everybody's names and I could just call up the buildings and whatever. The collection of data is going to be very important for me for the next few months. So I want you all to talk to your neighbors. Email me at bmorgan@westharlemdc.org and email me your information. Email me your management company so that I have somebody so that I can catalog all 220 of these buildings. I'm coming with resource and help. I'm not trying to ask for any money or anything for you, so feel free. Reach out to me. Send me your questions. The questions that you send me, the connections that you make me, allow us and my team to put together a strategy of how we're going to reach out and help you as individuals. But it all starts with me being able to understand the different nuances of the individual buildings, and that all starts with me being able to reach out to you and your board. And I realize we're not taking any positions, so it's not a situation where we're trying to take sides with this part of the building that wants to do this and another part of the building that does that. We are going to be respectful of everybody as shareholders, as board members, and provide resources that are fair and equitable so that we can all hopefully get on the same page and protect this important and vital part of affordable housing that, as we all know, is disappearing in New York City. People's homes, they're important, and we got to make sure that we do the right thing by everybody. Whether we agree or disagree, we can agree on one thing, that our homes and this part of the affordable housing stock in New York is important. So thank you very much. This was the first of many things that we're going to do. So thanks for coming out and being a part of this first one.